I slammed the brakes so hard, my coffee flew out of the cup holder and splattered across the windshield, but I barely noticed. Because right there, in broad daylight, 5 strangers were hauling stuff out of my private storage barn like it was a yard sale. And standing in the middle of them all was none other than Karen, the self-appointed queen of our HOA, smirking like she'd just conquered a small country. One man was dragging my fishing kayak across the grass. Another was balancing 2 of my lawn chairs on his back. And I swear to God, someone had my backup generator in a wheelbarrow. I jumped out of my truck, heart pounding, voice sharp. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Karen turned slowly, holding a clipboard like it was a royal decree. "The HOA voted. Your storage is now shared community overflow. You weren't using it," she said, with a smile like she was doing me a favor. For a second, I actually looked around to make sure I hadn't been hit on the head or woken up inside a prank show. But nope, this was real. These people were walking in and out of my barn like it was public property. I stomped across the gravel and yanked the barn door open wider. Inside, my worst fear confirmed itself. My neatly arranged tool wall was bare in places. My old camping stove was missing. One of the tarps was peeled back, and under it, the antique snowmobile I'd inherited from my grandfather had a massive scratch across the chrome. "You've got 5 minutes to get off my land," I said, barely keeping my rage in check. Karen laughed. "You're on HOA land now. We redrew the community boundary lines last year. Didn't you read the notice?" She tapped the clipboard dramatically. "We voted." Voted, like some kind of medieval land grab. I pulled out my phone and started filming. "Smile, Karen. This is going on the neighborhood page, and then straight to my lawyer." Her smile faded a little, but she tried to hold the high ground. "We have bylaws. You agreed to them when you moved here." I replied, "I also have a deed. And that barn? Built with my own 2 hands. On my land. With my materials. Behind a gate you broke open. Explain that to a judge." Karen blinked and gestured for the others to hurry up. "Come on, folks, let's wrap it up." Just like that, they piled into their SUVs like they'd just had a fun day at a flea market. I stood there, watching them drive away, my barn half looted and my head spinning. After they were gone, I stepped back inside and really looked around. Half my extension cords were missing. The shelf with paint cans was knocked over. There was a dirty, foot-shaped streak on the door of my old fridge. And, the worst part, someone had left an open bag of McDonald's on my workbench. The kind of greasy, disrespectful fingerprint that told me they thought this was all perfectly okay. I took photos, one by one, of every bit of damage. Then I walked the perimeter to check the gate. The lock had been cleanly cut, probably with bolt cutters. I took a photo of that, too. I didn't just want to be angry. I wanted evidence. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed up scrolling through the HOA bylaws on my tablet. Tablet in hand, I scrolled line by line, and there it was, tucked inside a section I'd never noticed before. Communal storage may be utilized at the discretion of the board if a property is deemed underutilized for more than 90 days. Vague, murky, and probably not legal, but just the kind of loophole someone like Karen could twist around her little finger. I clicked back to the email newsletters. Sure enough, buried in the HOA bulletin from 6 months ago was a one-line mention. Storage reallocation options may be discussed in upcoming meetings. Nothing specific. No names. No votes I'd ever been told about. The next morning, I launched my drone. I wanted a full aerial scan of my land, plus whatever these freeloaders were doing with my stuff. Within minutes, I had clean footage of 2 different neighbors using my lawn mower and blower. I zoomed in and caught one of them tying a tarp over my kayak, on his back porch. Another clip showed someone hauling my patio umbrella across the street like it was some sort of refugee artifact. I edited the footage into a short reel and posted it to the local Facebook group with the title, HOA decided my barn was free storage. Here's what they took. The response was immediate and nuclear. Over 400 likes and 300 comments in under 2 hours. Half the neighborhood was outraged. The other half defended the HOA like it was some kind of sacred cult. Karen, of course, tried to spin it. She commented under the post saying, "Let's keep discussion civil. The board only acted with community fairness in mind." Someone replied, "Fairness doesn't include breaking and entering, Karen." By noon, I had an email from the HOA with 4 violation notices attached. According to Karen, I was being fined for unauthorized signage, unsecured property, visual clutter, and display of threatening behavior. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my phone. The cherry on top? She added a personal message at the bottom. "You might want to reconsider your tone before things escalate further." Escalate? She hadn't seen escalation yet. I called my cousin Lenny. He's a real estate lawyer who hates HOA abuse with a fury of 10 suns. I laid it all out, and before I even finished talking, he was already laughing. "They broke your lock, entered your property, used your stuff without permission." Oh, buddy, this is going to be fun. He told me not to retaliate yet. "We're going to do this smart. First, change your locks. Then get me every single piece of footage, every email, and every bylaw. Let's line up the chessboard before we move the queen." I hung up feeling more powerful than I had in days. But I wasn't just going to rely on the courts. If they wanted to treat my property like their personal garage, I was going to give them a reality check they wouldn't forget. As I walked out to the barn that evening, a plan was already forming. I looked at the broken latch, the open door, the faint smell of gasoline and fast food, and I smiled. The gloves were coming off. And next time they came near my land, they'd be leaving without their cars. The locksmith was sipping coffee outside his van when I pulled into his lot the next morning. His shirt said Mitch's Mobile Locks, and he looked up with a kind of cautious smile that said he didn't know whether I was a customer or a problem. I walked straight up to him and got right to the point. "You cut the lock on my barn 3 days ago," I said, watching his expression. He blinked, set down the cup, and nodded slowly. "Yeah, that was for the HOA, right? Lady named Karen." I nodded. "Did she show you any kind of documentation?" He scratched the back of his head. "Yeah. She had this letter with HOA letterhead. Said the storage was part of communal property now. She signed it and everything. Even had a little HOA stamp at the bottom. Seemed official." I stared at him. "You realize that building is on private land, separate from the HOA's jurisdiction, right? You trespassed." Mitch's jaw tensed. "Look, man, I don't go around asking for deeds. If someone shows me paperwork and pays up front, I do the job." I took a breath. I wasn't here to punch anyone. I was here to stack evidence. "Would you be willing to email me a copy of that letter?" Mitch hesitated. "Why?" I replied, "Because I think you were tricked into committing a crime. And I think Karen forged that document." Back in my truck, I called Lenny and told him everything. He whistled low into the phone. Classic HOA overreach. They think a laminated badge gives them federal powers. He told me to keep gathering documentation. Get photos. Statements. Timestamp everything. We want this airtight. But before we file anything, change every lock and post signage that makes your claim clear. No trespassing, signs aren't just for show. They matter in court. I already had a hardware store trip planned, but now it felt like the prelude to a tactical mission. I wasn't just defending property anymore. I was preparing a siege. When I pulled into my driveway that afternoon, something didn't feel right. There were more cars than usual on the street. My gate, though locked the day before, was swinging half open. And then I saw them. Tables. Folding tables. Lined up in rows. In front of my barn were boxes, bins, and signs that read Community Yard Sale. I nearly snapped my own steering wheel in half. A group of HOA members were casually sipping lemonade, waving to people like they were hosting a suburban bake sale. I jumped out of the truck and marched up. "What the hell is going on?" One of the women smiled and said, "Karen said it was fine. It's just one day." I didn't respond. I just walked straight to the barn door and flung it open. More of my tools were gone. Even my old tire compressor had vanished. A group of teenagers were using my folding chairs for shade like it was some kind of county fair. And then, of course, she appeared, Karen, wearing oversized sunglasses and a salmon-colored visor, clipboard in hand. "You're being very aggressive," she said, writing something down before I could even speak. "I'm documenting this." I pointed at the tables. "You're selling things on land you don't own. That barn is not HOA property. The land is not HOA property. And if one more person walks through that door, I swear I'll call the sheriff myself." Karen's tone changed. "You're making this harder than it has to be. The board authorized a one-day event. You missed the vote. That's not my fault." I pulled out my phone again and started recording. "Say it louder. Say again that you authorized use of my private property. You're on video." Her smile wavered just slightly, and I knew I'd landed a punch. Then, as if God himself wanted to boost the signal, a white van with the local news channel's logo rolled up to the curb. Apparently, the drone footage I'd uploaded had gained traction online, and someone from the station thought it would make a good local interest story. A reporter stepped out with a cameraman in tow, and suddenly Karen was all poised and polished. "Welcome. We're just hosting a community event to promote sharing and neighborhood unity." I stepped in front of the camera. "This is private property. That barn is on deeded land, not governed by the HOA. The people behind me are trespassing. This woman broke a lock, used forged documents, and now she's running a garage sale with my tools." The cameraman panned behind me, catching the look of shock on one neighbor's face. Karen's eyes darted to the lens and back to me. "You're blowing this out of proportion." I smiled. "I'm just getting started." By evening, the tables were gone, and the cars had cleared out. But I didn't waste a minute. I called Dave, a no-nonsense contractor buddy with power tools and no fear. That night, under portable lights, we replaced every lock on my property, new steel latch for the barn, reinforced gate lock. I even added a padlock to the old tool shed just in case. Then I printed new signs and posted them around the perimeter. "Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted under video surveillance." I installed 3 new cameras, including one directly above the barn door and another at the gate entrance. I wasn't playing anymore. The next morning, I woke up to Karen's newest tactic, retaliation fines. 4 envelopes were taped to my door. 1 for unauthorized nighttime construction. 1 for hostile signage. 1 for improper camera placement. And the final cherry on top, fine for community intimidation. I laughed so hard I scared my cat. It was like a desperate child trying to win a game by making up rules. I took photos of the fines and mailed copies to Lenny, who responded within 10 minutes. "These are so flimsy, I could wipe a sneeze with them. Time to take this up a notch." We drafted a cease and desist letter that night. It listed the lock cutting, the unauthorized event, the forged document, and the repeated use of my property without consent. Lenny's tone was firm and surgical. "Any further trespassing will result in immediate legal action, including pursuit of damages and attorney's fees." We printed it on heavy stock paper, stuffed it in an envelope, and hand-delivered it to the HOA drop box. I made sure to record myself doing it. By the time the sun set, I had reclaimed my barn, rebuilt my defenses, and turned my property into a legal fortress. But Karen wasn't done yet. That woman had the resilience of a virus with a vengeance. Weed and the delusion of a dictator. I knew the real battle was just beginning. She'd underestimated me once. She wouldn't make that mistake again. But now I had the locks, the cameras, the lawyer, and one hell of a revenge plan brewing. And if her people were going to keep parking on my land, well, then they better keep their license plates up to date, because next time their cars weren't going to be there in the morning. It started with a silver SUV parked right in front of my barn the next morning, right over the patch of gravel I had just cleared the night before. The license plate read HO4EVR, and the driver had the audacity to leave a sticky note on the barn door. It said, "Shared resource. Don't block access. Karen." My hands curled into fists. I stared at that SUV like it had personally insulted my ancestors. Not only were they trespassing again, but now they were trying to claim permanent access to my land like squatters planting flags. I stepped back, took a picture of the car and the note, and sent it to Lenny with one word. "Ready." Lenny called within a minute. "How many vehicles total?" I looked around. Another sedan sat further down near the gate. A beat-up truck was parked half on my grass. 3, maybe more. His voice got calm in that way. It only did when he was legally plotting. You've got them. We already filed the cease and desist. Now it's time to enforce consequences. You know a tow guy? I smiled like a kid at Christmas. I know just the guy. Enter Big Dave. Dave ran the local towing business and had the reputation of someone who never asked unnecessary questions. He showed up just after midnight, headlights off, winch ready, and a smirk on his face. So, these are HOA clowns? I nodded. They've been warned, given legal notice, and still decided my property was their personal driveway. Dave spat on the gravel, adjusted his gloves, and got to work. The first car, a maroon sedan with a child soccer sticker, was lifted and gone in under 10 minutes. Next was the silver SUV, the beloved ride of Karen herself. Dave took extra care to avoid scratches, not because he was being nice, but because he wanted no wiggle room for complaints. We left behind neat printed notes on wooden stakes where each car had been. This vehicle has been removed due to unauthorized parking on private property. Reclaim at Dave's auto yard. Storage fees begin immediately. By sunrise, the property was clear. The silence felt like justice. But by 8:30 in the morning, the screaming started. I was sipping coffee on my porch when Karen showed up in a golf cart, flanked by 2 other board members and one guy holding a camcorder like it was the 1990s. Karen was in full meltdown mode, pacing in my gravel driveway like it was a courtroom. You have no idea what you've just done. That's destruction of community property. You're going to jail. I held up the cease and desist copy. This was served last week. Trespassing. Parking violations. I have security footage, signed documents, and an attorney on standby. Karen waved the paper away like it was a bad smell. You didn't have permission to tow our vehicles. We're a governing body. I stepped off the porch and walked right up to her. You're a committee of retired landscapers and Etsy sellers who think they can make up laws. My land is not under your control. Your cars were illegally parked. You want to test it in court? Please. Let's go. The man with the camcorder kept recording as Karen fumed, shouting something about retaliatory action and an emergency board meeting. I didn't care. My property was finally clear, my locks were secure, and the HOA was now the one playing defense. Within the hour, the neighborhood group lit up again. Someone posted a blurry photo of Karen losing it in my driveway with a caption. Karen gets towed. Blames the Constitution. The comments exploded. People were divided. Some thought I'd gone too far. Others called it the most satisfying thing they'd seen all year. One woman even offered to bake me a pie. The whole situation had turned into a local legend. That evening, I was invited, ironically, to the HOA's emergency board meeting. I went, not because I respected them, but because I wanted to see the fallout with my own eyes. They set up folding chairs in a neighbor's garage, complete with a big printed sign reading, "Urgent Community Crisis Discussion." About 20 people showed up. Karen, now visibly tired but still clinging to power, tried to maintain control. We are here to address the illegal actions taken by a resident who has chosen to break the spirit of unity that defines this neighborhood. I raised my hand. Karen glared. You're not on the board. I stood anyway. Neither are half the people here. Doesn't stop them from speaking. One of the other board members, a guy named Ron who'd always seemed like he was just there for the snacks, raised his hand too. Actually, let him speak. So I did. I explained everything. The broken lock, the fake documents, the drone footage, the stolen tools, the illegal sale, the forged letter, the cease and desist, the security footage. I laid it all out with calm clarity while Karen sat stiff as a lawn gnome. At one point, a neighbor whispered loud enough to be heard, "Wait, she really forged a letter?" I didn't even have to answer. One of the board members who'd resigned earlier that week stood up and said, "I saw the email chain." She knew it was private. That was the moment the room turned. People started talking. Questions flew. Why didn't we know? She said, he donated it. I thought it was community storage. Karen tried to interrupt, but the voices rose around her. A woman named Janet, who had always supported the HOA, said flatly, "You put us all at legal risk." Karen stood trembling and shouted, "This is mutiny." Ron replied calmly, "No, this is accountability." The room went silent. Then, one by one, several board members stood and announced they were stepping down. One suggested an audit. Someone else asked if a new rule could be created to limit the HOA's power over private lots. By the time the meeting ended, Karen had gone pale and quiet. She grabbed her clipboard and walked out without another word. I drove home in the dark, windows down, smiling for the first time in weeks. I felt peace. But I knew Karen wouldn't go down without trying to strike back. She was a snake in pearls, petty, vindictive, and desperate to stay in control. But she had made one mistake too many. She underestimated the one neighbor who wouldn't just roll over. And now, not only was she exposed, but the legal storm heading her way would make her little power trip look like a game of hopscotch. The land was mine. The law was mine. And soon, the entire neighborhood would know. This wasn't just a personal win, it was a public reckoning. And I was just getting warmed up. 3 days after the HOA meeting exploded in Karen's face, I got a certified letter on my porch. It was a formal summons. Karen was suing me for property interference, mental anguish, and public defamation. The envelope was thick with pages, and the language inside was absurd. She actually claimed I'd orchestrated a targeted campaign of humiliation by towing her vehicle and weaponizing social media to undermine her leadership role. I stared at the words, then burst out laughing so loud I startled my neighbor's cat. This woman had the nerve to break into my barn, allow others to loot it, get caught, then try to flip the script like she was the victim of a smear campaign. But I didn't panic. I called Lenny, emailed him everything, and waited. Lenny, of course, was thrilled. She just made our case even stronger. This isn't a defense anymore. This is offense. And she just gave us a golden opportunity to countersue. His voice had that tone again, the calm, gleeful tone of a lawyer with a full hand of aces. He started drafting our formal response that day, citing the cease and desist she ignored, the forged documentation, the damage to my property, the unauthorized sale event, the social media footage, and now the frivolous lawsuit. We're going to include a demand for compensation, property damage, legal fees, emotional distress. And while we're at it, I want to subpoena those HOA board emails. A few days later, I got a call from a guy named Rick who used to be on the board but had resigned during the chaos. He sounded nervous, like someone afraid his phone was tapped. "I don't want to be involved," he said, "but if you're going to court, you might want to know that Karen deleted a bunch of emails last week." I asked what kind of emails. He hesitated. "She told the board to act like the barn's always been shared space in one thread. And in another, she literally says, he's too passive to fight back. Just use it. I can forward what I saved. But don't mention my name." I promised I wouldn't. 10 minutes later, I had a folder in my inbox labeled HOA nonsense. Inside were screenshots, printouts, and half a dozen damning statements directly from Karen. Lenny nearly choked on his coffee when he read them. This is it. This is what we needed. She's toast. We submitted everything to the court, and our countersuit was officially filed. It named Karen personally, not just the HOA. It listed every piece of recovered evidence, each witness statement, and every incident she orchestrated. I didn't just want the lawsuit thrown out. I wanted a verdict so definitive she couldn't spin it into another power play. When the court date arrived, I wore the same button-up shirt I wore to my dad's retirement dinner. I didn't want to look angry or smug. I wanted to look like someone who had been pushed too far and decided enough was enough. Karen arrived with a folder the size of a toaster, flanked by some attorney who looked like he hadn't read the case file all the way through. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with gray hair and sharp glasses, looked through both complaints, then turned to Karen. "So you entered this man's property without permission, held a sale using his belongings, ignored a cease and desist, and now you're accusing him of defamation?" Karen stood stiffly. "He made me look like a criminal online." He made videos and labeled me a trespasser. People laugh at me in the grocery store now. The judge didn't flinch. Did you forge or authorize any documents suggesting the barn was community property? Karen's voice dropped a notch. The board assumed. The judge cut her off. Please answer the question. Karen blinked.
Yes.
But we believed again. The judge shut it down. Intent is irrelevant. You knowingly accessed a structure that was not HOA property. The fact that you justified it with internal discussions does not protect you from legal consequences. Lenny stood up, handed the bailiff our evidence folder, and calmly walked the judge through every point. The emails, the photos, the lock damage, the receipts, the towing documentation, even the security footage timestamp. The judge nodded slowly, flipping through each page. I've seen enough, she said. After reviewing the footage of the yard sale and the viral video of Karen yelling in my driveway, the judge ruled. The plaintiff's claim is dismissed. The countersuit for trespassing, property damage, and intentional infliction of emotional distress is accepted. This court orders the plaintiff to pay damages in the amount of $14,600 and cease all direct HOA disciplinary action against the defendant. Additionally, a cease and desist shall remain in effect. Violation of such will lead to further civil penalties. Karen looked like someone had just unplugged her from the wall. Her face drained of color. Her attorney leaned over to whisper something, but she was too stunned to respond. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I just stood there with the quiet satisfaction of someone who finally got justice. The court session ended, and I walked out of the building like I had just removed a 100-pound weight from my shoulders. Later that day, I went back to the barn. Everything was quiet. The gravel was clean. No cars. No tables. No cameras. Just peace. I decided it was time to make a small upgrade. I installed a carved wooden sign next to the barn door. Something permanent. It read, "Private storage. Trespassers will be towed." Yes, towed. A little typo I made on the carving machine that I decided to keep for the humor. I glued a plastic frog underneath the text and gave it a tiny HOA badge. Neighbors started coming by to take selfies with it. It became a joke, part warning, part folklore. Over the next week, the new HOA board started damage control. Karen resigned officially, citing unjust social persecution in her letter. No one really cared. Karen arrived with a folder the size of a toaster, flanked by some attorney who looked like he hadn't read the case file all the way through. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with gray hair and sharp glasses, looked through both complaints, then turned to Karen. So you entered this man's property without permission, held a sale using his belongings, ignored a cease and desist, and now you're accusing him of defamation? Karen stood stiffly. He made me look like a criminal online. He made videos and labeled me a trespasser. People laugh at me in the grocery store now. The judge didn't flinch. Did you forge or authorize any documents suggesting the barn was community property? Karen's voice dropped a notch. The board assumed. The judge cut her off. Please answer the question. Karen blinked.
Yes.
But we believed again. The judge shut it down. Intent is irrelevant. You knowingly accessed a structure that was not HOA property. The fact that you justified it with internal discussions does not protect you from legal consequences. Lenny stood up, handed the bailiff our evidence folder, and calmly walked the judge through every point. The emails, the photos, the lock damage, the receipts, the towing documentation, even the security footage timestamp. The judge nodded slowly, flipping through each page. I've seen enough, she said. After reviewing the footage of the yard sale and the viral video of Karen yelling in my driveway, the judge ruled. The plaintiff's claim is dismissed. The countersuit for trespassing, property damage, and intentional infliction of emotional distress is accepted. This court orders the plaintiff to pay damages in the amount of $14,600 and cease all direct HOA disciplinary action against the defendant. Additionally, a cease and desist shall remain in effect. Violation of such will lead to further civil penalties. Karen looked like someone had just unplugged her from the wall. Her face drained of color. Her attorney leaned over to whisper something, but she was too stunned to respond. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I just stood there with the quiet satisfaction of someone who finally got justice. The court session ended, and I walked out of the building like I had just removed a 100-pound weight from my shoulders. Later that day, I went back to the barn. Everything was quiet. The gravel was clean. No cars. No tables. No cameras. Just peace. I decided it was time to make a small upgrade. I installed a carved wooden sign next to the barn door. Something permanent. It read, "Private storage. Trespassers will be towed." Yes, towed. A little typo I made on the carving machine that I decided to keep for the humor. I glued a plastic frog underneath the text and gave it a tiny HOA badge. Neighbors started coming by to take selfies with it. It became a joke, part warning, part folklore. Over the next week, the new HOA board started damage control. Karen resigned officially, citing unjust social persecution in her letter. No one really cared. The board sent out a revised bylaw draft, this time allowing homeowners to officially opt out of certain shared resources agreements. A few neighbors apologized for participating in the sale. One brought me back my missing fishing pole with a 6-pack of root beer. I took it with a nod. I wasn't mad anymore. I just wanted my space, my rules, my property. And I got it, not through violence or screaming, but through documentation, law, and patience. Karen thought I'd roll over, that I'd be another pushover neighbor she could bully into silence. But instead, she handed me the rope and tied her own reputation with it. Her reign was over. The barn was secure. The signs were posted. And now, when anyone thought about trying something shady on my land, they looked at that wooden frog and remembered. Some neighbors don't bark. They build cases. A week after the verdict, the neighborhood finally settled into something that resembled peace. The constant tension that used to hum under every interaction, at mailbox pickups, trash days, casual lawnmower waves, had vanished like fog lifting off a field. People weren't whispering anymore. They were talking openly. There were fewer HOA notices stuffed into screen doors, fewer passive-aggressive emails about community standards, and more importantly, no more cars parked in front of my barn. I took walks again in the evenings, just me and my coffee, sometimes stopping at the wooden frog sign to wipe off dust and chuckle at the quiet reminder of how absurd things had gotten. One morning, a man named Paul, someone who had stayed neutral through the whole ordeal, approached me with a hesitant smile and a coffee in hand. He said he was one of the new interim board members. "Look, I just wanted to say you were right. That whole situation with Karen, it got way out of control." He paused and shuffled a bit. Some of us, we didn't speak up because we didn't want to get targeted. But after that meeting, I realized silence just feeds people like her. I nodded.
Yeah, well.
Better late than never. He handed me an envelope. "This is for your property repairs. Officially approved by the board."
We voted on it, a real vote this time.
We figured it was the least we could do. Inside was a reimbursement check, not massive, but enough to cover what had been broken or taken. I told him I appreciated the gesture, but didn't need the money. What I really wanted, I said, was for the board to actually protect homeowners instead of acting like landlords with clipboards. He nodded, shook my hand, and said, "We're working on it." Karen, of course, had disappeared from the public eye. Rumor had it she tried to start a blog about restoring neighborhood order, but was banned from several platforms for harassment. Someone claimed she was now part of a different HOA in another town, where she was already starting trouble. It wasn't surprising. People like her don't change, they relocate. I wasn't angry anymore. In some strange way, I almost pitied her. But I also made sure my lawyer had all the court documents saved in triplicate, just in case she ever thought about coming back. The barn, once a battleground, had gone back to being what it was meant to be, a place for tools, memories, and quiet work. I spent a weekend reorganizing it, restoring things that had been jumbled during the chaos. I even found my grandfather's old toolbox tucked behind a stack of tarps. I hadn't realized it had been moved. The brass clasp still worked perfectly, and inside were a few hand-labeled screws and a note in his handwriting. Asterisk, measure twice, cut once. Don't let idiots borrow your stuff. Asterisk, I laughed out loud. Somehow, even from beyond the grave, Grandpa knew exactly what to say. Not long after, a local woodworker named Nate reached out. He'd seen the drone videos, followed the whole saga online, and asked if I might be interested in renting out part of the barn for his carpentry business. He just needed a dry, secure space to store materials and maybe do some light weekend work. Normally, I'd hesitate. After everything that happened, I wasn't eager to share my space, but Nate was respectful, offered a fair monthly rent, and even brought over some of his handmade chairs as a show of good faith. We worked out a contract, and just like that, the barn took on new life. What Karen had tried to take by force was now serving its original purpose, on my terms. As the seasons changed, I started seeing small shifts in the neighborhood too. The HOA newsletter toned down its language. People who had once blindly followed Karen began asking questions at meetings. Someone proposed a neighborhood potluck, and no one even tried to regulate the tablecloth color. That might not sound like much, but around here it was borderline revolutionary. One afternoon, Janet, the same neighbor who used to be Karen's biggest cheerleader, brought over a basket of cookies. She didn't say much, just handed it over, smiled, and said, "That sign with the frog, funniest thing I've ever seen." I thanked her and let it be. Sometimes the smallest olive branch is still worth taking. The drone, which had once been my silent witness, now mostly captured quiet skies, gardens, and lazy dogs napping in backyards. I edited one last video. Nothing dramatic, just a peaceful overhead flight of the barn, the frog sign, and the empty gravel driveway. I called it Final Flight. No trespassing needed. It got a few thousand views, nothing viral, but the comments were kind. A few folks from other neighborhoods shared their own HOA horror stories. Some even asked if they could get a frog sign of their own. I told them I might just start a business. Toad Secure Storage, guaranteed to scare off Karens. Life moved on. The court settlement came in handy when I decided to add a motion sensor light system to the entire perimeter. It was overkill, but after what I went through, I figured peace of mind was worth a few extra batteries. I installed it myself one weekend and felt a strange kind of satisfaction drilling those brackets into place, like each screw was another nail in the coffin of Karen's control. In the end, what mattered wasn't just winning the legal battle or exposing the lies. It was reclaiming the right to set boundaries and have them respected. It was reminding the people around me, and maybe even myself, that quiet doesn't mean weak and patience doesn't mean permission. Karen took advantage of everyone's complacency. She turned politeness into a tool and used procedure like a weapon. But when someone finally pushed back, all her paper-thin power crumbled. Now, when I walk past the barn, I don't feel bitterness. I feel grounded. It's still my land, still my rules, and still a place where no one walks in uninvited.
And if they try?
Well, the cameras are rolling.